Welcome to the Billionaire's Choice. Subscribe and turn on notifications to enjoy more heartwarming stories of love and destiny. Let us know where you're watching from, and let's begin today's story. The worst moment of your life might be the exact place where your real life begins. The old stone chapel had never felt so silent. Just minutes ago, it had been filled with soft piano music, quiet laughter, and hopeful whispers from family and friends waiting to witness a forever kind of love. Now every sound seemed painfully loud. The ticking of the antique clock above the entrance echoed through the room. The rustle of expensive dresses. The uncomfortable clearing of throats. The faint vibration of a phone that refused to ring with the one call everyone was waiting for. Elena Ashcroft stood alone before the altar, her hands trembling around a bouquet of white peonies she had arranged herself only yesterday. As a wedding planner and florist, she had spent years making other women's dreams come true. She knew exactly how every flower should bloom, every candle should glow, every chair should be perfectly aligned. She believed if every tiny detail was right, love would always find its way. Today, every detail was perfect. Only the groom was missing. She looked toward the heavy wooden doors one more time, convincing herself they would open any second. They never did. Her maid of honor approached carefully, trying to smile through worried eyes. "Elena, maybe we should sit down." Elena barely heard her. Her phone buzzed at last. Her heart leaped. She unlocked the screen with shaking fingers. Only 6 words waited for her. "I'm sorry. I can't do this." No explanation. No goodbye. No signature. Just 6 words that shattered 2 years of promises. The bouquet slipped slightly in her hands. Around the chapel, whispers spread like wine through dry leaves. Some guests looked away out of sympathy. Others quietly reached for their phones. A few already began recording. The embarrassment arrived long before the tears did. Her father lowered his head. Her mother's mascara blurred as she tried to force a reassuring smile that fooled no one. Elena could almost hear tomorrow's conversations before they happened. Poor Elena, left at the altar. Didn't anyone see it coming? She inhaled slowly, determined not to cry in front of 200 people who suddenly felt like strangers. She had survived losing her small family business during the recession. She had rebuilt her career from nothing. She had worked 16-hour days decorating weddings she could barely afford to dream about herself. She refused to let this become the moment that defined her. The minister quietly stepped forward. "We can postpone if you'd like." Elena nodded without looking at him. Her legs refused to move. Every eye remained fixed on her. Every second stretched longer than the last. Then something unexpected happened. A man stood from the very last pew. He wasn't part of the wedding party. He hadn't spoken to anyone since arriving nearly 30 minutes earlier. His charcoal suit fit with effortless precision, but nothing about him demanded attention except the calm confidence in the way he walked. He moved through the center aisle without hesitation until he stopped beside Elena, close enough for only her to hear him. She glanced sideways, confused. His blue-gray eyes held neither pity nor curiosity, only quiet certainty. "You don't know me," he whispered gently. "But if you walk out of this church alone today, they'll remember your humiliation forever." Elena frowned, too stunned to answer. The stranger continued before she could speak. "Marry me instead." The words stole the air from her lungs. She searched his face, expecting to find amusement or cruelty. There was neither. "Pretend," he added softly. "Just for today." Her pulse thundered inside her ears. "Are you insane?" she whispered back. "Probably," he admitted with the faintest smile. "But I think this could save both of us." Elena stared at him, completely speechless. She had never seen this man before in her life. Yet somehow, in the middle of the worst day she had ever lived, a stranger had just offered her the most unbelievable choice imaginable. Behind them, the guests continued whispering, unaware that the next few seconds would change far more than a ruined wedding. They would change 2 lives. Forever. The silence stretched so long that Elena wondered if she had stopped breathing. She looked from the stranger's steady eyes to the hundreds of faces waiting for her answer. Nothing about this made sense. People did not simply appear inside abandoned weddings and ask complete strangers to marry them. "Who are you?" she whispered. The man extended his hand just enough for her to see the expensive watch beneath his cuff. "My name is Graham Whitmore." The name meant nothing to her. He seemed relieved by that. "You have exactly 30 seconds before someone decides this scene belongs on the internet forever," he said quietly. I am offering you a different ending. Elena searched his face for any hint of mockery. There was none. His voice remained calm, almost painfully sincere. Why would you do this for me? She asked. Graham hesitated for the first time. Because I also need someone to say yes today. Before Elena could ask another question, an elegant woman in a navy suit approached the edge of the aisle, clearly trying not to interrupt. Mr. Whitmore, she said carefully. The board members are calling again. Graham barely looked at her. Tell them I will call back in 15 minutes. The woman nodded once, although concern flashed across her face before she quietly stepped away. Elena noticed it immediately. Whoever this man was, important people answered to him. You are hiding something, she said. Yes, Graham replied without hesitation. But not from you. From everyone else in this room. He glanced toward the stained glass windows where afternoon sunlight painted soft colors across the polished floor. 3 days from now, I am supposed to finalize the largest merger in my company's history. The agreement contains one unusual family succession clause written by my grandfather before he passed away. Before permanent voting control transfers to me, I must demonstrate long-term personal stability, including a committed partnership or family structure that proves I am not controlled only by ambition. Elena frowned. What does that have to do with marriage? Everything, Graham answered. Several members of my board believe I only care about work. They think I am incapable of building a life outside the office. They have spent months searching for a reason to replace me. He gave a quiet, almost amused laugh. Ironically, billions of dollars may depend on whether I appear to have someone standing beside me. Elena stared at him in disbelief. You are telling me your company wants you married? Not exactly. They want proof that I can commit to something beyond quarterly earnings. He looked directly into her eyes. If I lose control, thousands of employees could lose the future we have spent years building. I cannot allow that to happen because of politics. She folded her arms, still gripping her bouquet. And you think pretending to marry a woman you met 2 minutes ago is a better solution? No, Graham admitted. I think it is the only solution either of us has left today. Elena looked toward the front row where her parents remained frozen in heartbreaking silence. Her mother quietly dabbed tears from her cheeks while pretending everything was fine. Her father refused to look up at all. She knew exactly what would happen if she walked away alone. The whispers would become headlines. Her business would suffer. Every future client would remember the florist who could organize perfect weddings but could not keep her own together. Graham seemed to read every thought crossing her face. This would be temporary, he said. No lies between us. No expectations beyond helping each other survive what comes next. If you say no, I will quietly leave and no one will ever know we spoke. Elena studied him one final time. Calm, honest, unshaken. He did not look like a man trying to rescue her. He looked like a man standing at the edge of his own cliff, hoping a complete stranger might keep them both from falling. Elena lowered her eyes to the bouquet in her hands. The white peonies suddenly felt heavier than they had only an hour earlier. They had symbolized a future that no longer existed. Around her, the chapel remained frozen in anticipation. Every guest was waiting for her next move, unaware that the choice before her had completely changed. She closed her eyes for one long breath. Then she looked back at Graham. If this is some kind of joke, she said quietly, you are choosing the cruelest place imaginable. I know, Graham answered. That is why I would never joke about it. His voice carried no urgency now, only patience. It was almost as though he had already accepted whatever answer she might give. That calmness unsettled her more than any dramatic speech could have. What happens if I agree? She asked. Graham glanced toward the side aisle, where Claire quietly approached with his attorney, carrying a slim cream-colored envelope. He handed it to her without opening it himself. Inside is a preliminary agreement my attorney prepared several months ago, hoping I would eventually meet someone willing to help me. I never expected today. Elena looked at the envelope but did not touch it immediately. You planned this. Not you, he replied. Only the possibility that one day I might need a practical solution instead of a romantic one. I did not carry it with me, Graham said quietly. Claire called my attorney the moment I asked you to consider this. Slowly she accepted the envelope. The envelope felt unexpectedly warm as she accepted it. She opened it enough to scan the first page. The language was straightforward. A temporary marriage. Complete financial independence for both parties. Absolute privacy. No control over one another's personal decisions. Mutual respect at all times. Either person could end the agreement after 6 months with written notice. There was one sentence that caught her attention immediately. Neither party shall ever be obligated to develop emotional attachment. Elena almost laughed despite everything that had happened. You even have legal paperwork explaining that people are not allowed to fall in love. Graham's expression softened with the smallest hint of humor. Lawyers like impossible sentences. She looked up again. And what do you receive besides appearances? Time, he answered. Enough time to protect the company my grandfather built from people who care more about power than employees. And what do I receive? Graham did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward her parents, sitting quietly together in the front. Phew. You receive the chance to leave this church with your dignity intact. Beyond that, anything you need to rebuild your business will be available, but only if you choose it freely. Nothing will ever be forced upon you. Elena swallowed hard. He had somehow understood exactly what frightened her most. It was not losing the man who had abandoned her. It was losing herself in front of everyone who mattered. Her mother suddenly stood and walked toward them. She stopped a few feet away, uncertain whether she was interrupting something important. Sweetheart, she whispered gently. Whatever happens next, your father and I love you. Nothing about today changes that. Elena felt tears finally reach her eyes. She hugged her mother tightly, careful not to crush the flowers between them. When they separated, her mother glanced at Graham with quiet curiosity. Young man, she said, I do not know what you are offering my daughter, but I can see one thing. Graham waited respectfully. You are the first person today who has looked at her instead of looking at the disaster. Graham lowered his head slightly. She deserves better than becoming someone's public embarrassment. Elena stared at him again. Something inside her shifted. She still did not trust the situation. She certainly did not understand it. But for the first time since reading those 6 heartbreaking words on her phone, she no longer felt completely alone. She looked at the minister waiting silently near the altar, then back at Graham. Her fingers tightened around the envelope before she finally spoke the words neither of them had imagined hearing that morning. If we do this, she said carefully, there will be rules. Graham nodded once. I would expect nothing less. For the first time since the ceremony had begun, Elena allowed herself to think like the woman who had spent years solving impossible wedding disasters. Panic never fixed anything. Decisions did. She slowly nodded once. All right, she said. Here are my rules. Graham remained completely still, giving her his full attention. First, we tell each other the truth. I have already been lied to once today. I will not build even a temporary marriage on another lie. Agreed, Graham answered immediately. Second, neither of us controls the other's life. I will not become a decoration standing beside a billionaire while everyone tells me who I should be. Agreed. Third, when these 6 months end, we both walk away with respect. No revenge. No hidden conditions. No surprises. Graham looked directly into her eyes before replying. You have my word. Elena studied him for another long moment. Strange as it seemed, his promises felt steadier than the vows the man she had planned to marry had whispered countless times before today. She finally extended her hand. Graham accepted it with a firm but gentle handshake instead of anything dramatic. It was a business agreement born inside a chapel built for love. His attorney, who had quietly entered through a side door moments earlier, stepped forward carrying a slim leather portfolio. The minister looked understandably confused, but after Graham spoke privately with him, and Elena quietly confirmed that she wished to continue voluntarily, the older man simply nodded. The minister explained that the chapel ceremony would be symbolic for the guests, while the legal paperwork would be completed privately later that afternoon once the license and required documents were verified. Marriage begins with choice, he said softly. If this is truly your choice, I will honor it. Elena signed the agreement first. Her signature looked surprisingly steady despite everything that had happened. Graham signed beside her without hesitation. The attorney carefully collected the paperwork before handing Graham a small velvet box. Graham opened it slowly. Inside rested 2 simple platinum wedding bands. They were elegant without being extravagant. Elena could not stop herself from asking, You already had rings? Graham gave an embarrassed smile that made him seem unexpectedly human. My attorney insisted we prepare for every possibility. I honestly believe they would stay inside this box forever. The honesty in that answer almost made her smile. Almost. Graham removed one ring and held it in his palm instead of reaching for her hand. There is one condition I would like to add, he said quietly. Elena raised an eyebrow. I am listening. These rings should never become chains. If, at any point, you decide this arrangement is hurting you instead of helping you, tell me. I will end everything immediately. She looked down at the simple band reflecting the afternoon sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows. There were no oversized diamonds. No attempt to impress anyone. Just a quiet promise of mutual respect. Graham gently placed the ring into her open hand instead of sliding it onto her finger. Were it only if you choose this, he said. Not because you feel trapped. Elena stared at the ring resting against her palm. Earlier that morning, she had believed a wedding ring represented certainty. Now she realized it represented something much more difficult. Trust. She slowly lifted her eyes to meet Graham's again, then carefully slipped the ring onto her own finger. The ring sat slightly loose on her finger, enough to make her smile through the absurdity of it all. Apparently your attorney planned even better than either of us realized, she murmured. Graham chuckled quietly. Or fate has an unusual sense of timing. The minister smiled gently before opening the ceremony book once more. The guests exchanged confused whispers as everyone took their seats again. No one fully understood what had happened during those extraordinary minutes at the altar. They only knew the bride who had nearly walked away alone was no longer standing by herself. Elena took one slow breath as Graham offered his arm. She hesitated for only a second before accepting it. Whatever happened after today remained impossible to predict, but one thing had already become undeniable. The life she thought had ended less than an hour earlier had quietly disappeared, making room for a future neither of them had ever planned. The minister looked from Elena to Graham one final time before asking the question that neither of them had imagined hearing together only 20 minutes earlier. Do you both enter this marriage of your own free will? Elena felt every eye in the chapel settle on her. This time she did not think about the man who had disappeared. She thought about the parents who had raised her to stand back up every time life knocked her down. She thought about the years she had spent building a reputation one wedding at a time. Most of all, she thought about the stranger beside her who had offered respect instead of pity. Yes, she answered quietly but clearly. Graham's voice followed without hesitation. Yes. The ceremony was simple. There were no handwritten vows, no romantic speeches, no promises about forever. Yet somehow every word sounded more honest than the carefully rehearsed ceremony that had been planned for months. When the minister finally announced them husband and wife, the chapel remained silent for almost 3 full seconds. Then Elena's mother began to clap through tears. Her father joined her. Slowly the rest of the guests followed, some still confused, others simply relieved that the heartbreaking afternoon had not ended in complete despair. Graham gently offered his hand. Elena accepted it, surprised by how warm his grip felt. He did not pull her close or try to create a dramatic moment for the audience. Instead, he quietly whispered, "Thank you." She looked at him with genuine confusion. For what? For trusting someone you did not know. Before she could answer, camera flashes suddenly lit up the front entrance. Several local photographers, originally hired to capture the wedding, hurried forward, sensing an unbelievable story unfolding before their lenses. Questions immediately filled the air. Who is the new groom? Was this planned? What happened to the original fiancé? Elena instinctively stepped backward, overwhelmed. Graham noticed immediately. Without raising his voice or showing frustration, he stepped slightly in front of her, creating just enough space to shield her from the growing crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said calmly, "today is not the day for speculation. My wife has had a difficult afternoon. We appreciate your kindness and your privacy." The room became noticeably quieter. There was something about the way he spoke that made people listen. Not because he was loud, but because he seemed completely certain of every word. Elena glanced at him with growing curiosity. Very few people could calm a room that quickly. As they slowly walked down the aisle together, guests smiled politely, while quietly trying to remember where they had seen Graham before. Several older businessmen exchanged puzzled looks. One woman suddenly covered her mouth in surprise after recognizing him from a magazine cover she had read only weeks earlier. Before she could say anything, Graham's assistant discreetly approached and whispered, "The cars are ready, sir." Elena caught the word before she could stop herself. Sir? She repeated under her breath. Graham gave her an apologetic smile. There are still many things we need to discuss. Outside the chapel, a line of sleek black vehicles waited beneath the bright afternoon sun. Elena stopped walking. Those are for us. Yes, Graham answered simply. She looked back at the modest sedan her parents had driven to the ceremony that morning, then at the elegant convoy waiting at the curb. The contrast felt almost unreal. Graham opened the rear passenger door, but waited without rushing her. Nothing changes unless you choose it, he said softly. One step at a time. Elena looked at the platinum ring resting quietly on her finger. Just hours ago, she had believed her future had ended before the ceremony even began. Now she was climbing into a car beside a man whose life remained almost entirely unknown, carrying only one certainty with her. Whatever waited beyond those chapel doors would be unlike anything she had ever imagined. The ride through the city passed in complete silence. Elena sat beside Graham, watching familiar streets slowly give way to neighborhoods she had only seen in magazines. The black sedan moved smoothly through afternoon traffic while the skyline reflected across the tinted windows. She still held her bouquet on her lap, although several petals had begun to loosen after everything the flowers had endured. Graham noticed them falling one by one. We can have fresh flowers delivered if you would like, he said. Elena smiled faintly. These are staying with me. He looked at the bouquet with quiet curiosity. Even after today? She nodded. Especially after today. They remind me that beautiful things can survive unexpected endings. Graham turned toward the window, thoughtful. I like that. A few minutes later, the convoy entered the private drive of an elegant glass and stone tower overlooking the river. Uniformed attendants greeted the vehicles before the security gate opened automatically. Elena looked up at the building in disbelief. You live here? Graham answered with a small nod. The top 3 floors. She almost laughed, convinced he had to be exaggerating. He was not. The private elevator opened directly into a spacious residence filled with warm wood, floor-to-ceiling windows, and soft natural light, instead of the cold luxury she had expected. There were books everywhere. Framed landscape photographs covered one wall. A grand piano stood quietly near the windows, untouched. The apartment felt lived in rather than displayed. This does not look like a billionaire's home, Elena admitted. Graham loosened his tie for the first time all day. What does a billionaire's home look like? She thought for a moment. Gold. Marble. A room that exists only to impress strangers. He laughed softly. Then I suppose I disappoint people rather often. His assistant entered carrying a tablet. Mr. Whitmore, the board meeting has been moved to tomorrow morning at 9. They are expecting an explanation. Graham accepted the update calmly. Thank you, Claire. Claire offered Elena a warm smile. Mrs. Whitmore, it is nice to meet you. Elena nearly corrected her before remembering the platinum ring resting on her finger. Claire seemed to sense her discomfort. Please do not worry, she said kindly. This has been an unusual day for everyone. After Claire quietly left, Elena slowly removed her wedding shoes and sighed with relief. Graham noticed immediately. Your feet must be exhausted. I have been standing since 6 this morning, she admitted. I honestly forgot how uncomfortable wedding shoes can become. Without another word, Graham disappeared into another room. He returned carrying a brand new pair of soft slippers still inside their box. Elena looked at them in surprise. How did you know my size? Graham looked genuinely embarrassed. I did not. My house manager keeps several sizes for guests. I guessed. Elena slipped them on. They fit almost perfectly. You have slippers for unexpected guests? She asked with a smile. Apparently my staff prepares for situations even stranger than today. The light-hearted moment faded as Graham became serious again. There is something you deserve to know before tomorrow. He walked to the living room table and picked up several business magazines stacked neatly together. Every cover featured the same photograph. Graham in a dark suit standing in front of corporate headquarters beneath bold headlines about mergers, innovation, and billion-dollar investments. Elena stared at the magazines before slowly looking back at him. You are that Graham Whitmore. He nodded once. Chief Executive Officer of Whitmore Global. She suddenly remembered where guests at the chapel had recognized him. Newspapers. Television interviews playing silently in airport lounges. Financial magazines she had never bothered reading while waiting for clients. You really are one of the wealthiest business leaders in the country, she whispered. Graham gave a tired smile. Unfortunately, yes. Elena walked slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the street nearly 40 stories below. Several camera flashes reflected off the glass. 2 satellite news vans had already parked across the avenue. A small drone hovered above the sidewalk while photographers pointed long lenses toward the entrance of the building. Even from that height, she could recognize the restless movement of reporters waiting for something to happen. Her stomach tightened. Claire quietly entered the living room holding a tablet. 3 reporters are waiting outside the main entrance, she said. They have been here for almost an hour. Graham barely looked away from Elena. Use the private exit. Claire nodded before leaving again. Elena continued staring at the crowd below. Is this my life now? She asked softly. Graham joined her by the window without invading her space. Only if we let strangers decide it, he replied. They can write headlines. They cannot decide who you become. Elena watched. Another camera flash burst against the afternoon sunlight and realized that the wedding she never expected had already become tomorrow's biggest story. Elena looked down at the simple wedding ring again. Just hours earlier, she had believed she was marrying an ordinary man. Now she realized she had stepped into a world where every decision would be watched, questioned, and judged. She quietly wondered whether surviving a broken wedding had been the hardest part of her day, or only the beginning of a much greater challenge. The next morning arrived far sooner than either of them expected. Elena woke just after sunrise in a beautifully prepared guest suite overlooking the river. For a few peaceful seconds, she forgot everything that had happened. Then her eyes settled on the platinum ring resting on her hand, and the memories of the previous day returned all at once. She slowly walked toward the window, watching the first light reflect across the water nearly 40 stories below. Her old apartment, her flower studio, her unfinished wedding reception, all of it suddenly felt like another lifetime. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Claire entered carrying a breakfast tray filled with fresh fruit, coffee, and warm pastries. Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore, she said with an encouraging smile. Elena smiled politely. You really do not have to call me that every time. Claire laughed softly. I understand. It will probably take me a while to adjust, too. She placed a folder beside the tray. Mr. Whitmore asked me to bring you this before he left for an early conference call. Elena opened the folder and found a carefully organized schedule for the coming week. There were no glamorous parties or luxury vacations. Instead, she saw meetings with legal advisors, interviews with public relations consultants, and one charity gala scheduled for Friday evening. At the bottom of the page, Graham had written a short note in neat handwriting. If any of this makes you uncomfortable, we change the plan together. Nothing is more important than your peace of mind. Elena read the sentence twice before quietly folding the note back into the folder. No one had asked for her opinion. This often in a very long time. Downstairs, Graham was already standing inside his home office speaking through a video conference with senior executives from 3 different cities. His calm expression never changed as charts and financial reports filled the large display behind his desk. When the meeting finally ended, he noticed Elena waiting near the doorway. Good morning, he said warmly. Did you sleep at all? Eventually, she admitted. I am still trying to understand how my entire life changed in less than 24 hours. Graham nodded knowingly. I have had that feeling more than once. Before either of them could continue, Claire hurried into the office holding her phone. Her normally composed expression had changed. I think you should both see this. She placed the phone on the desk. Every major news website carried the same photograph from the chapel. Graham and Elena walking down the aisle together. Headlines covered the screen. Billionaire chief executive officer marries mystery bride after dramatic wedding twist. Whitmore global leader surprises guests with unexpected ceremony. Social media comments multiplied by the second. Another headline suddenly appeared near the top of the screen. Is this marriage real? The article claimed an anonymous insider believed the ceremony had been carefully staged as a publicity strategy designed to strengthen investor confidence before Whitmore Global finalized its upcoming merger. Another paragraph questioned whether shareholders were being manipulated by a carefully timed personal announcement. Claire frowned immediately. We never released that information. Graham's expression hardened for the first time that morning. He studied the article for several silent seconds before quietly saying, So someone inside did. Neither of them spoke again. Elena realized the story was no longer about a broken wedding. Someone had already turned their private decision into a weapon. Elena quietly looked away from the screen. "They do not know me at all," she whispered. Graham immediately turned the phone face down. "Then we will not let strangers decide who you are." She looked at him with uncertainty. "You cannot stop people from talking." "No," he agreed. "But I can make sure they eventually talk about the truth instead of assumptions." His confidence was reassuring. Yet Elena could already feel the invisible weight of public attention pressing against her shoulders. Only yesterday she had worried about arranging centerpieces and seating charts. Now complete strangers debated her character without ever meeting her. Graham seemed to understand exactly what she was feeling. "Today you do not have to prove yourself to anyone," he said. "You only have to be yourself." Before Elena could answer, another message appeared on Claire's phone. This one came directly from a member of the board. The emergency meeting had been moved forward. They wanted to meet Graham's new wife immediately. Elena slowly looked at the ring on her finger, then back at Graham. The agreement they had signed inside the quiet chapel was no longer just between two strangers. The entire world had begun watching, and their first real test as husband and wife was about to begin. The headquarters of Whitmore Global rose above downtown like a city of glass reflecting the bright morning sky. Elena stepped out of the car beside Graham, instinctively smoothing the simple cream dress Claire had helped her choose earlier that morning. It was elegant without trying to attract attention, exactly what Elena had requested. She had spent years dressing brides to shine on their happiest days. Today she only wanted enough confidence to walk through the front doors without feeling like an imposter. Employees moving through the spacious lobby slowed almost immediately. Conversations became whispers. Some smiled politely. Others discreetly glanced at the news alerts still displayed on their phones. Elena could almost hear the questions forming before anyone spoke them aloud. Graham noticed her hesitation and quietly matched his pace to hers. "You do not have to impress anyone here," he said. "That is easy for you to say," Elena replied with a nervous smile. "This building has your name on it." Graham looked up toward the enormous company logo suspended above the reception desk. "It belongs to every person who works here. I simply have the privilege of protecting it." The receptionist stood immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore." Elena smiled politely, still adjusting to the unfamiliar title. As they entered the private executive elevator, she noticed Graham studying the day's agenda on his tablet. There were financial reports, acquisition reviews, investor calls, and finally the emergency board meeting. Not once did he complain about the pressure waiting upstairs. "Does it ever become easier?" she asked quietly. He looked up. "What?" "Having everyone expect you to know the answer." Graham considered the question longer than she expected. "No," he admitted. "You simply learn that leadership is not pretending to have every answer. It is making sure no one carries the burden alone." The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Before they reached the boardroom, a sharply dressed man approached with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. "Congratulations, Graham," he said smoothly. "Quite an unforgettable wedding." Graham nodded politely. "Thank you, Victor." Victor turned toward Elena. "Mrs. Whitmore, I imagine yesterday changed your life rather dramatically." "It certainly surprised me," Elena answered with quiet honesty. Victor chuckled. "Some people wait a lifetime for an opportunity like yours." Victor's smile widened ever so slightly. "Although I suppose timing like this is almost too perfect," he continued. "People may wonder whether yesterday's ceremony was carefully planned from the beginning." Elena instantly understood what he meant. He was not questioning the marriage. He was questioning her character. The implications settled heavily between them. Before she could respond, Graham took one calm step forward. His voice remained steady. "Victor, Elena did not marry an opportunity. She married me. Anyone who suggests otherwise is questioning my judgment, not hers." The hallway became noticeably quieter. Victor forced another smile. "Of course, that is what I meant." "Good," Graham replied. "I would hate for anyone here to misunderstand her reasons before taking the time to know her." There was no anger in his voice, no raised volume. Yet the conversation ended immediately. Victor excused himself and walked away without another comment. Elena looked at Graham in surprise as they continued toward the boardroom. "You did not have to do that." Graham stopped walking for a moment. "Actually, I did." "Why?" "Because yesterday we agreed on mutual respect." If I allow people to question your integrity while standing beside me, then my word becomes meaningless. Elena felt something shift inside her. This was not part of any legal agreement. No contract required him to defend her reputation in a hallway. He had simply chosen to. Before they reached the boardroom doors, voices echoed from the lobby several floors below. A reporter managed to call out through the security barriers. "Mrs. Whitmore, did you know he was a billionaire before the ceremony?" Camera shutters clicked rapidly as photographers leaned forward, hoping for a single reaction. Security calmly guided everyone back behind the barriers while Claire glanced through the glass wall overlooking the entrance. "They knew exactly what time we would arrive," she said quietly. Graham followed her gaze for only a moment before noticing Victor standing farther down the hallway. Victor casually adjusted his cufflinks and offered the faintest smile before disappearing around the corner. Graham said nothing, but Elena saw the brief exchange of looks between the two men. She suddenly realized the reporters had not arrived by coincidence. Claire quietly opened the large conference room doors. 12 board members looked up at the exact same moment. Some appeared curious. Others looked openly skeptical. Every seat around the polished walnut table was occupied except two placed together near the center. Graham glanced toward Elena with quiet reassurance. "Ready?" She inhaled slowly before nodding. "Not completely." A faint smile crossed his face. "That makes two of us." Together they walked into the room, unaware that the next hour would test far more than the business arrangement they had created inside a quiet chapel only one day earlier. Elena could feel the attention in the room before anyone spoke. 12 experienced executives studied her, with polite smiles that revealed very little. Graham calmly introduced her without embellishment. "This is my wife, Elena Whitmore." No long explanation. No attempt to justify yesterday's impossible events. Just quiet certainty. The chairman welcomed her politely before inviting everyone to begin. Financial reports appeared across the large display, while discussions moved quickly from acquisitions to future investments. Elena remained silent, listening carefully. She knew nothing about billion-dollar negotiations, yet she recognized something familiar beneath the numbers. Every decision affected real people. Nearly an hour into the meeting, Victor leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together. "There is one remaining matter," he said smoothly. "Considering the unusual circumstances surrounding this marriage, perhaps Mrs. Whitmore would like to explain why she believes she belongs in this room." The question sounded professional, but everyone understood its purpose. The room fell silent. One of the directors slowly reached for his tablet before looking toward Graham with visible concern. "Mr. Whitmore," he said carefully, "someone emailed every board member this document less than 5 minutes ago." He turned the screen so everyone could see. Across the top appeared the words "temporary marriage agreement." Most of the text had been blurred, but several key clauses remained readable. Elena felt the color leave her face. Graham's expression changed almost imperceptibly as he examined the screen. Victor leaned back comfortably in his chair. "I wonder who leaked it," he said with practiced innocence. No one answered. Every eye in the room turned toward Elena as though waiting for the agreement to define her before she had the chance to define herself. Graham prepared to answer, but Elena gently touched his sleeve beneath the table. This time she wanted to speak for herself. She stood slowly, meeting every curious face without lowering her eyes. "I do not believe I belong here because of money," she began calmly. "Yesterday morning I believed I was marrying someone else. By the afternoon I had lost the future I thought I understood. Then your chief executive officer treated me with more dignity in 15 minutes than many people manage in a lifetime." No one interrupted. "I have never managed an international corporation. I cannot analyze stock prices or negotiate mergers. But I do understand commitment. I built a small business one customer at a time. I learned that trust takes years to earn and only moments to lose. If that lesson matters inside this company as much as it mattered inside my flower shop, then perhaps I do have something worth contributing someday." She smiled gently. "If not, I will gladly continue learning." The room remained completely still. Finally, one older board member nodded slowly. "That may be the most honest answer we have heard in this room all week." A few directors quietly agreed. Others remained skeptical, especially Victor, but the room had changed. Elena had not won everyone over, but she had made it impossible for them to dismiss her as a stranger chasing status. Victor leaned back without another word, but the faint smile on his face suggested he had not finished playing his game. Graham looked at Elena with unmistakable admiration, not because she had defended him, but because she had remained completely herself. After the meeting ended, only 2 board members approached to introduce themselves properly. The others left with guarded expressions, making it clear the real battle for acceptance had only begun. One woman asked about Elena's floral business. Another complimented the simple wedding bouquet she had carried into the building. Conversations replaced assumptions. As they walked toward the elevator, Claire hurried over carrying a small package. "This arrived for you a few minutes ago," she said. Elena opened the envelope inside and found the return of her engagement ring from the man who had abandoned her. There was no note, no apology, just the ring. She looked at it quietly for several seconds before closing the box again. Graham never asked what was inside. He simply waited. Elena smiled softly and handed the box to Claire. "Please donate this to a charity auction." Claire looked surprised. "Are you certain?" Elena nodded. "It reminds me of promises that were never kept. Perhaps it can become something good for someone else." Graham looked at her with quiet respect. As they stepped into the elevator, he reached into his pocket and carefully removed the same velvet box that had held their simple platinum bands. "Yesterday I told you never to wear this ring unless you truly chose it," he said gently. "That promise still stands. Whether 6 months or 6 years from now, I never want obligation to decide your future." Elena looked at the plain band already resting on her finger. 24 hours earlier it had represented survival. Today it represented something unexpectedly different. Hope. She smiled through grateful eyes. "Then let us begin exactly as we promised." Graham tilted his head slightly. "One step at a time?" She nodded. "One honest step at a time." Claire's phone suddenly vibrated. She glanced at the screen, and the color slowly drained from her face. "Mr. Whitmore," she said quietly. Graham looked up immediately. "The contract has just leaked to every major news outlet." Silence settled over the elevator. Elena instinctively looked at the simple platinum ring on her finger before raising her eyes toward Graham. He turned to the glowing city skyline beyond the glass walls and exhaled slowly. "The real battle begins now." Together they watched the elevator descend toward the busy city below, both understanding that the marriage created inside a moment of heartbreak had not solved every problem. It had simply given 2 strangers the chance to discover that the strongest foundations are not built on perfect beginnings, but on kindness, respect, and the courage to choose each other again every single day. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to The Billionaire's Choice. Every week, we bring you heartwarming stories of love, destiny, and life-changing decisions. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a new story.